Hi guys, welcome to Azure Content. This is part 11 in Azure Synapse Analytics Real-Time Scenarios playlist. In this video, we are going to learn how to perform incremental load from on-premise SQL Server to dedicated SQL pool using Synapse pipelines. So in our previous video, we have covered what is the difference between full load and incremental load, and also how to perform full load from on-premise SQL Server till ADLS, and then from ADLS till dedicated SQL pool. So please watch part 9 and 10 of this playlist in order to get a good understanding about the concept of full load and incremental load. Okay. So anyways, let me do a quick recap of the example of full load and incremental load so that it will help in the practical session of this video. Okay. So what happens in case of full load is, suppose this is the source table where we have columns like ID, name, address and modified date. Okay. So we have 4 rows as of now. So in case of full load, what happens is it will take the entire record from the source and then it will copy it into this. Now suppose on day 2 there is a new insertion in the table. Okay, suppose this is the record which got inserted on today's date. So what happens when we run our ETL pipeline is it will truncate the target data set, okay, or target table, and it will do a reload from source to sink. Okay, so in this way the newly inserted record will also get copied. Even if there is any update in the table on today's date, okay, it will actually truncate the table and then do a reload. Okay, this is how full load works. So when is full load feasible, or when should we do a full load? When the amount of data in the source table is very less, or suppose we are dealing with some thousands of records, so it is feasible to use full load because it is a very simple concept. So we can truncate the table and do a reload if it is taking some few minutes or few hours. Okay, but in case of millions of records, this is not a feasible way because it is also not cost effective to delete the entire millions of records from sync and do a reload every time. Okay, so in that case, let me reset the data what we had earlier and show you what happens in case of incremental load. Okay, so this was our data, right? So in case of incremental load, what happens is even in incremental load, the first load is always a full load because there is nothing in target data. Then how can we check what is the incremental data now? So in case of incremental load also, the first load is a full load. So once the full load is completed, if there is any insertion in the table on next day, okay, suppose this new data got inserted into the source table on today's date. Okay, so what happens is we have to identify which of the records present in the source is the incremental record. So for that, here we have to introduce the concept of benchmark value or watermark value. Okay, benchmark or watermark value. So out of all the columns, we have to identify which column is a benchmark column. Okay, so in our control table we will have these fields, okay, benchmark field, where we will store which column of a table. So in this case it is modified date column. So which column is having the timestamp value which represents when the column or when the row got inserted or updated. So in this case it is modified date. And what will be the benchmark value? It will be the maximum of modified date present in the target. Okay, so it is actually benchmark value is nothing but it is a timestamp value which we will treat it as the reference to identify the incremental record from the source. Okay, so in this case, what is the maximum of modified date present in the sync? It is 01/01/2022 itself. Okay, because all the records are having same modified date. So this is we will keep it in our control table as benchmark value. Okay, now On next load, we have to identify what is the incremental record. So for that, what we will do is we will compare this benchmark value with all the values present in the modified date. We will see where the modified date is having a greater value than this benchmark value. So in this case, we can see only this particular value is having this particular row is having modified date greater than the benchmark value. So we have to copy only this particular record into our sync dataset. Okay, so this is the concept of insert. Now if there is any update in the table on next day, okay, so what happens now? Again we will check what is the benchmark value. So now the maximum of modified date is 21/6/2022. So we will update our control table and have this as the benchmark value again. Now we will compare our source dataset with this benchmark value, and we will find out that the row where we have the modified date in source, which is having greater value than benchmark value, is this one, the where id is equals to 2. So we have to only copy this record. So what happens if we directly copy the record? It will create a duplicate, right? It will create a duplicate. So we have to apply the concept of upsert or merge in this place. Okay, so this upsert concept we will cover in our next video, but for now we will try to copy it in the same table, and we will try to identify the benchmark value again, and it is how incremental load will work. Okay, so just keep all these in mind, and when we will do the creation of pipeline, then you can just correlate with this concept. Okay, so let me go to the control table, which is present in our SQL server, Azure SQL server. Okay, so right now in our control table, we have lots of data, but we have kept only 3 tables as active table. In our previous video also we have done a full load of only these 3 tables. Okay, to start applying the concept of incremental load, we have to first create those columns which are needed, that is benchmark field and benchmark value, right? So let me go to presentation. Okay, so we have to introduce columns, which is benchmark field, which will have the data type as varchar, and benchmark value, which will have data type as date time. Okay, let me first do this step. Okay, so we have to alter the table. Alter table control dot metadata, and what is the column name? Benchmark field. Benchmark field will hold the column name which has the timestamp value. Okay, so column name means we have to give some varchar value. So let me run this. So similarly we have to add benchmark value column, and this will be of data type as date time. Okay, let me alter the table again. So now we have 2 new columns, benchmark field and benchmark value. Okay, so for each of the tables we have to identify what is the benchmark field for these tables. Okay, so looking at the columns only, we can identify the timestamp column. So for example, here you can see contact type ID, name, modified date. So modified date represents the date on which the column on which the row has got inserted or updated. If we run this in our on-premise, that is the source database, you can see this is how the data looks like. So modified date is having timestamp value, which represents when this particular row got inserted or updated. Okay, so we have to update this particular record from null to modified date. So similarly for other tables, for salesperson we have to identify what is the timestamp value. So here it is last modified date. Similarly for unit measure, it is updated date. Okay, so we have to update these 3 values in benchmark field. So we will do that. We update control dot metadata set benchmark field equals to, so for the first case it is modified date where table name equals to contact type. Okay, so this is a manual process. Let me do that. So this is updated for the first record or the first table. So similarly for other two tables we will do that. For salesperson we have last modified date as the benchmark field. So last modified date. Let me run this. Okay, now for unit measure it is updated date. Okay, updated date. Let me run this. Okay, so we are good. We have updated our benchmark fields. Okay, now we have covered the second step also. We have updated the benchmark field to a timestamp column name from the source. So now what we have to do is we have to actually identify the benchmark value from the target, and we have to update this field as well, but we will not do it manually. We have to build our pipeline in such a way that it will identify the benchmark value on the fly, and it will update it in this control table as well. Okay, so let me go to the pipeline and make the necessary changes. So this is how our pipeline, full load pipeline looks like till now. So we have a lookup which runs the query on the Azure SQL server and fetches the data from control.metadata. Okay, so it will give us exactly this record. Okay, so let me run this till this point and show you what is the output. So we can see the count is 3, which is nothing but the 3 active tables which is present in our control table. Okay, so it has the newly introduced column details also, benchmark field and benchmark value. So we are good with this. And then inside this for each, we are checking if the incremental flag is y or n. If it is y, it will go inside this true block. If it is n, it will go inside this false block. So till now we have only created the pipeline for full load. Okay, so this is copy data activity is copying the data from OnPremise till ADLS, and then these are checking the latest file, and this copy data is copying the data from ADLS till Dedicated Sql. So inside this false block it is meant for full load. Okay, so once the full load is done, what we have to do, we have to actually identify the modified maximum of modified date, right? That is we have to identify what is the benchmark value. So we can either do that here, creating a lookup activity here to identify what is the maximum of modified date, but it is actually a continuous process. So in case of incremental load also, once first incremental load is done, we have to do the same thing. We have to update the benchmark value again. So we have to do the same thing here inside the true block also. So what we will do, we will create that particular activity outside this if block. Okay, so we have to do this job only for those records, means we have to update our benchmark value only for those entries in control table where we have some benchmark field. Okay, there are lots of records in the control table, but we don't want to, we cannot update these records, or we cannot update these benchmark value unless and until we have the benchmark field available. Okay, so we will put another if condition to check if the benchmark field is not empty. Okay, let me auto align it. Yeah, so in this if condition we will put if the benchmark field is not empty. Okay, so there is a function called not, and there is also a function called empty. Okay, now inside this empty we have to give benchmark field. So from where it is coming from the lookup itself. That benchmark field is coming from the lookup output, right? We are getting one by one for each record. So here we will give item dot benchmark value. benchmark field. Benchmark field. Okay, so we are good. If the benchmark field is not empty, then we will go inside true condition and we will look for the maximum of modified date. Okay, we can either use lookup activity, or we can create a stored procedure and use stored procedure activity, or we can also use a script activity. This activity has been newly introduced by ADF and Synapse. So here in this lookup activity we will hit the target. What is our target? Our target is dedicated SQL pool. Okay, so we are going to fetch benchmark value from dedicated SQL pool. Let me rename this and let me remove first row, and we are going to point it to dedicated SQL pool. And we have created this data set earlier in our previous videos, so please watch those videos if you want to know how we parameterized it. So here we will pass the value for that parameters, item dot table underscore schema, then item dot table underscore name. Okay, and now we will write the query to fetch the benchmark value, that is select maximum of, suppose I am writing a dummy query now for one of the tables, modified date as benchmark value from person dot contact type. Okay, contact type. So now this is a hard-coded query. Now we have to make it dynamic for all the tables. So instead of modified date, we will give from where we are getting this modified date, from benchmark field, right? So we will give @item dot benchmark field. Let me enclose it within curly braces. Okay, select maximum of it will fetch like modified date or last modified date as benchmark value from table schema dot table name, right? So @item dot table underscore schema, and replace this with @item dot table underscore name. Let me give curly braces here also. Okay, so we are good. This particular lookup will fetch the maximum of the benchmark field. Let me run till this point so that you will get a better understanding. Okay, so if we see the output of this lookup, it is giving us the value of benchmark value, right? This is a timestamp value for each of the table. It is hitting and giving us the benchmark value. Now we have to update the same thing in our control table here. Let's go inside this if condition again. Let's write the update query. We can do that again inside a lookup activity or stored procedure or a script activity. So let me connect these two and we will rename it as update benchmark value. Now we have to do it on our control table that is present in Azure SQL Server. So let me write the update query here. So how the update query will look like? Update control dot metadata set benchmark value equals to some timestamp value where table underscore name equals to suppose contact type or something. So here we have to make this query dynamic, right? So from where we will get this value? We are getting the value from this lookup, right? We are getting the benchmark value from this lookup, and the same we need to pass it here. We need to set the benchmark value with the same value, with the same output value coming from the lookup. So here our lookup is fetch benchmark value, and the output is present in benchmark property, benchmark value property. So here let me select this, and we will give @ here, and we will give curly braces also. and value is the array, right? If we see the output, value is the array where first item of the array is having property called benchmark value. Let me copy this, and here we will update it, value 0, which is the first item of the array, dot benchmark value. Okay, from this property we are getting the value actually. And then for each instance we have to make this update. So where table name equals to @item dot table underscore name. Okay, let me give curly braces again. But actually we are missing one thing here, as we are using lookup activity to run a DML statement, and that is a update query. So we have to give select statement also, because lookup is expected to return some data. So we will just write a dummy select one as output. It will not do anything, but it will just avoid us from failure. Okay, so let me run the pipeline now. So yeah, this is completed. Now let's go to the control.metadata table and see if these values got updated or not. So let me run this. So now we can see the benchmark value got updated. Okay, so now we have to take this benchmark value as the reference, and we have to identify the incremental record from the source. So as there is as our source is not a live data, so we have to actually do the insertion and updation ourselves in the source. So let me go to the on-premise SQL Server dataset, and let me write some insert queries for these three tables. Okay, let me quickly do that. Insert into person.contact type, select, let me copy one of these rows. So this is for the first ID column. Contact type ID is an identity column, so I'm removing that from insert statement. Okay, as this record we are inserting today, so we have to change it to today's date. Okay, 06/21. Okay. Oh, okay. So this should be a unique. There is some unique constraint present. So let me change it. Okay. So one row got affected. So we can see this row got inserted just now. So for this table, let's do an update, which will also be considered as an incremental record. Okay. So let's write update statement. Update this table. Set. Suppose we are updating this particular column, row grid equals to, let me change the value from 0 to 1, where let's take business entity ID, it might be unique. So let me copy this, equals to this. Okay, so one row got affected. If we check this, yeah, this row got affected, but we forgot to modify this last modified date as well. So let me set last modified date equals to today's date, right? Today's date 2022 6/21. Okay, this is for the same record. So we are good. We have updated one record here. Now for the third table, we will do an insert again. Let's copy this, insert into this table, insert into this table, select. Okay. So let me give some other values, xy, let me give it as test, and let me give today's date, 21. Okay, let me run this. Okay, so we are good. We have inserted into two table and we have updated one table. Okay, so now this is the incremental data that should get added on into our target table. Okay, so for that let's do the pipeline changes. So let me go inside for each block. So inside the true condition we have to create those activities which will take care of loading the incremental data. Okay, so the concept is similar to the full load. So let me copy all these let me copy all the activities and we will make changes in that. Let me paste it. Let me connect these activities. Okay, now let me just give a name like underscore incremental so that we don't have any confusion when we are running the pipeline. While checking the execution we can see which activity is running. Okay, so now we have to only take the incremental records from the source. If you see the source query, it is item.query, which is nothing but the query present in our control table, these queries, right? So it is nothing but select these columns from this table, which will actually copy the entire table. Okay, but in case of incremental record we have to identify which of those records are having modified date greater than the benchmark value present in our table. So here we have to concat where modified date is greater than our benchmark value. Okay, which is this one. Okay, so this is how we have to frame the query in our pipeline. So we need to add where clause where modified date. So this modified date is for only one table. For other tables it is different, the column name is different. So for that we have to give @item dot benchmark field. Okay, let me give curly braces here as well. Okay, is greater than this value, which is nothing but item dot benchmark value. Okay, so @item dot benchmark value. Yeah, we can also use concat function here, but I am just using string interpolation. Okay, so we are good with the query now, and let me just check everything is good here. We have changed the activity name, so we have to give underscore inc. So we are good. Now in case of copy data from ADLS to dedicated SQL pool, let me change this one again. So in case of full load we were actually truncating the table, right? But in case of incremental load we cannot do that. So let me remove this. Okay, we are not supposed to truncate the table before the load. So from pre-copy script I'm removing that. Here actually we have to apply the upsert concept, but for this video I'm not going to do that. We will cover that in next video. So let's just run this pipeline and we will see if the incremental record got pulled or not. Okay, let's first see our dedicated SQL pool. So I am connected to dedicated SQL pool and we will see those three tables. Okay, let me copy this and we will see. Okay, just a second. Yeah, so we have already done one full load in dedicated SQL pool. So we can see there are 20 rows in person.contact type, and it is not having that record which we manually created just now in our source, that is in our on-premise SQL server, right? So now what we are expecting is these tables will have this particular row as well. Okay, this particular row, I mean whatever we changed in our source tables, it will be reflected in our dedicated SQL pool tables. Okay, so let's run the pipeline, and then we will also see benchmark values should also be updated to the newer value, that is these values. Okay, so let me run the pipeline now. So now we can see instead of copy data 1 that is present in our full load, instead of this it is running copy data underscore incremental. So incremental records are getting pulled. Okay, so all the activities inside this true condition is getting executed. So you can see lookup underscore inc, get metadata underscore inc, then copy underscore inc. Okay, so let's wait for that. So this copied data 2 is actually copying the data from ADLS to dedicated SQL pool. Okay, so this is done. Now it is fetching the benchmark value from the dedicated SQL pool, and then it will update it in the control table. Okay, let's first go to the dedicated SQL pool and see if we got the newly inserted record in the source or not. So here we should have one more record in contact type that should have the value called sales representative 1, right? Here we added it, and this should be the value. Let me just run this table. So here you can see this got added sales representative 1, but actually in dedicated SQL pool sequence is not followed, so we can see it is randomly got added in the second position, so it's fine, not an issue. Now for salesperson we are expecting business entity ID 276 would be updated. Okay, let me run this. 276, we can say 276 and 276 again. So as I told earlier in this here, that if we do not use upsert, if we don't merge the data, then it will create a duplicate in case of update. Okay, so this is what happening in this case. Here you can see the earlier data, and here you can see the latest data. Okay, so this is the older modified date and this is the new one, but our concept is correct till now, but this upsert thing we will implement in our next video. Okay, now in this table production.unit measure, we are expected to see xy and test. Okay, let me see those records are coming or not. So it might be coming somewhere in the middle, it is coming. Okay, so we are good, and let us go to the pipeline and see benchmark value got updated or not. Okay, so the pipeline execution is completed. Let's go to the control table and we will see the benchmark value should also be updated now. So let's run this and see all this is having today's date, okay, which is expected. So this is how incremental load works, right? So we are good with this. Let me publish this change, and in the next video we will try to implement upsert concept.